Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the communication panel started making sounds he had never heard before. The bridge of the UES Vengeance was quiet in the early shift hours, and most of his crew was still sleeping. Jake set down his cup and walked over to the communication station, where red lights were blinking in patterns that seemed almost alive. Lisa Carter came running onto the bridge, still pulling on her uniform jacket. She was the best communications officer in the Third Fleet, and Jake had requested her personally when he took command of the Vengeance. Lisa dropped into her chair, and her fingers moved across the controls like she was playing music. The strange sounds filled the bridge, and Jake felt something cold move down his spine. Ben Hughes appeared next, carrying a data pad and looking confused. Ben was the navigator, and he always looked confused when something interrupted his sleep, but this time was different. He stared at the readings on his pad and then looked at Lisa, and then at Jake. The sounds coming from the speakers were definitely not human, and they were definitely not from any known alien species in the database. Lisa worked for 20 minutes before she looked up at Jake with wide eyes. She said the signal was weak, and it was coming from very far away, but it was definitely a distress call. Ben checked his star charts and said the signal was coming from a sector that human ships had never explored. Jake ordered both of them to keep working, and called for Dr. Alex Turner to come to the bridge. Dr. Turner arrived 15 minutes later with his hair messy and his clothes wrinkled, but his eyes were bright with curiosity. Alex was a xenobiologist, which meant he studied alien life forms, and he was very good at his job. He listened to the sounds for a few minutes and then asked Lisa to play them again, slower. The third time he heard the signal, his face went pale. Alex said the sounds were not just random noise, but actual language patterns, and whoever was making them was in serious trouble. Lisa had been running the signal through the computer translation programs, but nothing was working. Alex suggested they try a different approach, and he started working with Lisa to break down the signal into smaller pieces. It took them 4 hours of constant work, but finally they had something that made sense. The computer speakers crackled, and then a voice spoke in broken English that sounded like it was crying. The voice said, "Please," and then any civilized species, and then something about the Krex Dominion finding their world. Jake felt his blood turn cold when he heard the name Krex Dominion. Every officer in the human fleet had heard whispers about the Krex in classified briefings. They were supposed to be a myth or maybe an old story that spacers told to scare each other. But intelligence reports suggested they were real, and they were something that consumed entire civilizations. The alien voice continued speaking, and Lisa typed the words as they came through the translation program. The message said they consume everything, and we are the last survivors of the Zalari people. Then it gave coordinates and said, "We know death comes, but perhaps someone will remember us." The transmission ended with silence that felt heavier than any sound. Jake immediately sent the recording to Admiral Kate Sullivan, who commanded the Third Fleet from her flagship UES Guardian. Admiral Sullivan was known throughout the human military as someone who made hard decisions quickly and never backed down from a fight. Jake knew she would want to hear this transmission personally. While they waited for Admiral Sullivan to respond, Jake ordered Dr. Turner to analyze everything they could learn about the signal. Alex worked with the computers to study the biomarkers in the alien voice, and what he found made everyone on the bridge stand very still. The Zalari seemed to be similar to humans in many ways that were hard to explain. Ben plotted the coordinates from the message and discovered the signal was coming from a star system that was at least 3 weeks away at maximum speed. The system was not on any human star charts, and there were no reports of any human ships ever traveling in that direction. It would be a dangerous journey into completely unknown space. Admiral Sullivan responded to Jake's message within 2 hours, and her reply was short and direct. She ordered the Vengeance to maintain position and continue monitoring for any additional signals. She also ordered Jake to prepare a full report on everything they had discovered, including Dr. Turner's analysis of the alien biomarkers. Dr. Turner worked through the night, and his report made everyone who read it feel something strange in their chest. The Zalari voice patterns showed they experienced emotions very similar to humans. Their mathematical concepts were advanced but built on principles that human scientists would recognize. Most importantly, their art and music patterns suggested They valued the same things humans valued. When Admiral Sullivan received the full report, she called a meeting of all her senior officers aboard the Guardian. Jake took a shuttle over with Dr. Turner and Ben Hughes. The meeting room was filled with captains and commanders who looked serious and worried. Admiral Sullivan played the alien message for everyone in the room, and Jake watched their faces change as they heard the desperate voice asking for help. Some officers looked angry and others looked sad, but everyone looked like they wanted to do something. Admiral Sullivan then had Dr. Turner explain his analysis of how similar the Zalari were to humans. Captain Nicole Brooks of the U.S. Thunder spoke first and said it could be a trap. Captain Steve Martinez of the U.S. Lightning said it might be, but they could not ignore a distress call from people who seemed so much like humans. The debate went on for 2 hours, and Jake could see that Admiral Sullivan was thinking hard about something important. Finally, Admiral Sullivan stood up and said she had made her decision. She said the Third Fleet would investigate the Zalari distress call, even though it meant going into unknown space to face an enemy that might be more dangerous than anything humans had ever encountered. She said sometimes the right thing to do was also the most dangerous thing to do. Jake felt pride fill his chest as he listened to Admiral Sullivan give orders to prepare the fleet for departure. Every ship captain in the room stood up and saluted, and Jake knew they were about to do something that would change everything. The Third Fleet was going to find out what happened to the Zalari people, and if the Krex Dominion was real, then humanity was going to meet them face to face. The meeting ended, and Jake returned to the Vengeance to prepare his ship and crew for the journey. As he looked out at the stars, he wondered what they would find in that distant star system, and whether the Zalari people were still alive to be rescued. 3 weeks later, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, and Jake Morrison felt his stomach turn cold at what he saw through the view screen. The Zalari homeworld was dying before his eyes, and massive alien ships were eating it piece by piece. The ships looked like giant insects mixed with machines, and they pulsed with dark colors that hurt to look at. Admiral Sullivan's voice came over the fleet communication channel, and she ordered all ships to maintain stealth mode while they observed the situation. Jake could hear the tension in her voice, and he knew she was seeing the same horrible things he was seeing. The planet that had once been beautiful was being stripped bare by creatures that seemed to enjoy destruction. Commander Ryan Clark was leading a stealth mission aboard the UES Shadow, and his ship moved closer to get better readings on the alien vessels. Ryan was known for being brave but also careful, and if anyone could get close without being detected, it would be him. His ship had special equipment that could record everything and send it back to the fleet without being seen. The footage that came back from Ryan's mission made everyone who watched it feel sick. The alien ships were not just destroying the planet, but they were processing the people who lived there. Millions of Zalari were being fed into machines that turned them into fuel for the alien fleet. Jake watched the recordings and felt anger growing in his chest like fire. Dr. Turner analyzed the alien ships and discovered they were called Krex vessels, and they were completely biological. The ships were alive, and they fed on other living things to grow stronger. Alex explained that each ship was like a giant mouth with engines and weapons, and they could consume entire planets if given enough time. Ben Hughes was monitoring all the sensors when he detected something that made him call out to Jake with excitement in his voice. There were still life signs coming from underground on the planet, and the readings suggested there might be thousands of Zalari still alive down there. Ben worked with his computers and found what looked like a hidden city deep beneath the surface. Engineer Maya Rodriguez joined Ben at the sensor station, and she confirmed that there was definitely a large underground facility with power sources and life support systems. Maya was the best engineer in the fleet, and she could read sensor data like other people read books. She estimated there might be 50,000 Zalari hiding in the underground city. Jake immediately reported the discovery to Admiral Sullivan, and she ordered all ships to begin detailed scans of the area. The scans showed that the Krex had not yet found the underground city, but they were using deep-boring machines to search for exactly that kind of hiding place. Maya calculated they had maybe 6 hours before the Krex found the survivors. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Price was in charge of the fleet's Marines, and he studied the tactical situation with growing concern. Danny had fought in more battles than anyone else in the fleet, and he knew when a situation was hopeless. The Krex fleet had over 200 ships, and each one was designed for war and destruction. Dr. Turner continued studying the recordings from Ryan's stealth mission, and what he found changed everything. The Zalari were not just another alien species, but they were remarkably similar to humans in ways that seemed impossible. Their cities had been built with the same sense of beauty that humans appreciated, and their art showed they cared about the same things humans cared about. The most shocking discovery came when Alex analyzed recordings of Zalari families trying to escape the Krex attack. Human crew members who watched the recordings saw alien parents sacrificing themselves to save their children, just like human parents would do. The Zalari showed the same courage and love and hope that humans showed when facing impossible situations. Jake found himself staring at a recording of a Zalari mother pushing her child into an escape pod, while Krex machines closed in around her. The alien mother looked directly at the camera, and her expression was exactly the same as any human mother would have in that situation. She was afraid, but she was also determined to save her child, no matter what happened to her. Admiral Sullivan called another emergency meeting, and this time, the mood in the room was completely different from the first meeting. Every captain and commander had seen the recordings, and every one of them looked angry and determined. Captain Brooks still thought it might be a trap, but even she admitted the recordings looked completely real. Captain Martinez stood up and said something that made everyone in the room go quiet. He said he had watched Zalari children crying for their parents, and he had watched Zalari parents dying to protect their children, and if humans did nothing, then they were not the species he thought they were. Other officers nodded, and Jake could see that something important was happening. Dr. Turner presented his analysis of Zalari culture and technology, and what he had learned made the situation even more urgent. The Zalari had developed advanced science and mathematics, but they had never developed weapons of war because they were a peaceful species. They had no way to fight against something like the Krex, and they had been completely helpless when the attack came. But Alex had also discovered something else that made everyone in the room pay attention. The Krex were not attacking randomly, but were following a specific pattern across the galaxy. They moved from system to system, consuming everything they found and growing stronger with each victory. The pattern they were following would bring them to human space within 50 years. Admiral Sullivan stood up and explained that the Zalari distress call was not just a cry for help, but was also an early warning system. If the humans did nothing now, they would eventually face the Krex at Earth, but by then, the enemy would be much stronger. The choice was to fight the Krex now when they were smaller, or fight them later when they were unstoppable. Jake listened to the discussion and realized that every officer in the room was coming to the same conclusion. They could not save the Zalari homeworld because it was already destroyed, but they could save the survivors, and they could stop the Krex from destroying other worlds. The humans had stumbled into a war that was bigger than anything they had ever imagined, but it was a war they could not avoid. The meeting ended with Admiral Sullivan giving orders to prepare for battle against an enemy that had never been defeated. Jake returned to the Vengeance knowing that his crew was about to face the greatest challenge in human history, and the outcome would determine the fate of countless species across the galaxy. Admiral Sullivan called an emergency meeting of all ship captains, and Jake Morrison found himself sitting in a holographic conference room with 20 other commanders who looked tired and worried. The images of the destroyed Zalari world were still fresh in everyone's mind, and the weight of what they had discovered hung over the room like a dark cloud. Captain Nicole Brooks of the UES Thunder spoke first, and her voice was sharp with concern. She said they were outnumbered 10-1 by an enemy that had destroyed countless civilizations, and attacking would be suicide for the entire fleet. Nicole had always been the voice of caution in Admiral Sullivan's command group, and she made valid points about the impossible odds they faced. But Captain Steve Martinez of the UES Lightning stood up with fire in his eyes and delivered words that would echo through human history. He said he had watched the recordings of what the Krex did to children, and he had seen Zalari parents die protecting their families, and if humans ran away now, then they were not the species he thought they were. Steve's voice shook with emotion, and Jake could see other captains nodding in agreement. The debate that followed was fierce and emotional, with officers arguing on both sides of the question. Captain Helen Foster argued for strategic withdrawal and said they should return to human space to warn Earth about the Krex threat. She pointed out that losing the entire Third Fleet would leave humanity defenseless if the Krex followed them home. Commander Chris Wagner disagreed strongly and demanded immediate action to save the Zalari survivors. Chris had lost his family in a pirate attack years earlier, and he understood what it meant to be helpless while loved ones were in danger. He said waiting would only give the Kreks more time to find and kill the remaining Zalari hiding underground. Dr. Turner had been quietly analyzing data during the argument, but now he stood up and provided information that changed everything. Alex explained that his study of Kreks movement patterns showed they were not conquering randomly, but following specific routes through the galaxy. The routes were designed to consume the maximum number of populated worlds in the shortest amount of time. The most shocking part of Alex's analysis was his prediction that the Kreks' expansion pattern would bring them directly to human space within 50 years. By that time, they would have consumed dozens more civilizations and their fleet would be massive and unstoppable. The Zalari distress call had not just been a cry for help, but an early warning that humanity's time was running out. Jake listened to the discussion and realized that every argument was missing the most important point. The choice was not whether to fight the Kreks, but when to fight them. If they retreated now, they would face a much stronger enemy later with no allies and no advance warning. If they fought now, they might save lives and gain valuable intelligence about their future enemy. Admiral Sullivan had been listening to all the arguments without speaking, but now she stood up and asked a question that silenced the room. She asked what kind of species humanity wanted to be known as in the galaxy. Did they want to be the species that ran away when others needed help? Or did they want to be the species that stood up against evil no matter what the cost? The question hung in the air, and Jake could see every officer in the room thinking hard about their answer. Captain Brooks looked uncomfortable, but she admitted that the recordings of Zalari families had affected her deeply. Captain Foster said she still thought retreat was the smart choice, but she also said she would follow orders and fight if that was what Admiral Sullivan decided. Dr. Turner provided one more piece of crucial information that tipped the scales toward action. He had been analyzing the data from the Zalari survivors and discovered they possessed advanced technology that could help human ships fight more effectively. The Zalari had developed powerful shields and energy weapons, but they had never used them for war because they were a peaceful people. The surviving Zalari were willing to share their technology with the humans who had come to help them. Alex explained that combining human military tactics with Zalari advanced science could create weapons and defenses that might actually work against the Kreks' biological ships. It would not guarantee victory, but it would give them a real chance to fight. Admiral Sullivan made her decision and announced it to the gathered officers with calm determination. The Third Fleet would engage the Kreks fleet and attempt to rescue the Zalari survivors. She said it was not just about saving one species, but about sending a message to the galaxy that some things were worth fighting for no matter what the odds. Jake felt pride and fear mixed together in his chest as he listened to Admiral Sullivan give her orders. Every captain in the room saluted and accepted their assignments for the coming battle. They all knew they might not survive, but they also knew they were doing something that mattered more than their individual lives. The preparation for battle began immediately with engineers working around the clock to modify human ships using Zalari technology. Maya Rodriguez led teams of technicians who installed alien shield generators and weapon systems that had never been tested in combat. The modifications were dangerous and experimental, but they were also the only hope for victory. Engineer Rodriguez discovered that human ships could be enhanced in ways that the Zalari had never imagined. Human military engineering focused on durability and efficiency, while Zalari science focused on power and precision. When the two approaches were combined, the results were better than anyone had expected. The Zalari survivors were brought aboard human ships, where they worked alongside human engineers to complete the modifications. The leading Zalari scientist was named Zethkri, and he was amazed by human determination to fight an enemy they had never seen before, just to save people they had never met. Zethkri told Jake that in all their history, the Zalari had never encountered a species like humans, who would risk everything for strangers. Most species in the galaxy avoided conflict and hid from threats like the Kreks, but humans seemed to run toward danger when others needed help. He said it was either very brave or very crazy, and he was not sure which. As the fleet prepared for battle, Jake stood on the bridge of the Vengeance and looked out at his modified ship and crew. They had become something new and dangerous, and they were about to face an enemy that had never been defeated. The next few hours would determine whether humanity's first contact with galactic civilization would end in victory or complete destruction. The battle began when the Krex fleet detected the human ships and immediately moved to surround them like a pack of hungry predators. Jake Morrison watched through the view screen as the alien vessels closed in, and he felt his heart beating fast in his chest. The Krex ships moved with terrifying grace, and their biomechanical forms pulsed with digestive acids that could dissolve metal and flesh. Admiral Sullivan's voice came over the fleet communication channel, giving the order to attack, and Jake felt the Vengeance surge forward with power he had never experienced before. The Zalari modifications had turned his ship into something new and deadly, and the weapons that fired from his gun ports tore through Krex bioarmor like it was made of paper. The human strategy was unlike anything the Krex had ever encountered in their long history of consuming civilizations. Instead of trying to preserve their ships and retreat when damaged, the humans fought with calculated recklessness that confused and frightened their enemies. Human captains used their vessels as weapons when necessary and turned every battle into a fight to the death. Captain Martinez led the Lightning in a direct assault on a Krex command vessel, and his ship's new energy weapons carved deep wounds in the alien biohull. The Krex vessel tried to respond with its acid projectors, but the Zalari shields deflected the attack and sent the corrosive material back at the enemy ship. Jake watched in amazement as the Krex vessel began dissolving itself with its own weapons. Commander, Ryan Clark's stealth ship struck at the Krex from directions they never expected, and his teams used hit-and-run tactics that drove the enemy into confusion. Ryan had studied the biomechanical nature of the Krex ships and discovered they had weak points where their organic neural networks connected to their mechanical weapon systems. The UES Shadow appeared behind a massive Krex harvester, and Ryan's crew fired specialized rounds into the neural connection points. The alien ship began convulsing like a wounded animal, and its weapons started firing randomly in all directions. 3 other Krex vessels were damaged by their own ally before the harvester finally died in a burst of green fire. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Price led boarding parties that turned the enemy's own biotechnology against them, and his Marines moved through Krex ships like deadly ghosts. Danny had trained his men to fight in zero-gravity and hostile environments, but nothing had prepared them for the inside of a living enemy ship that tried to digest them as they walked through its corridors. The Marines wore Zalari combat suits that protected them from the acidic atmosphere inside Krex vessels, and they carried weapons designed to disrupt biological neural networks. Danny's team systematically shut down the organic control systems that allowed the alien ships to function and turned proud Krex vessels into floating metal coffins. Dr. Turner and the Zalari scientist Zethkri worked together aboard the Guardian to find weaknesses in the Krex fleet coordination. Alex had noticed that the alien ships moved in perfect harmony, like they were controlled by a single mind, and he suspected there was a central command system that coordinated their attacks. Zethkri confirmed Alex's theory and explained that the Krex used a bio-neural network that connected all their ships in a hive mind system. If they could disrupt that network, the entire fleet would lose coordination, and the individual ships would become vulnerable to focused attacks. The problem was finding the main command vessel and getting close enough to plant a neural virus. The turning point of the battle came when Captain Nicole Brooks volunteered her ship, the Thunder, for a suicide mission that would save the entire human fleet. Nicole's vessel had taken heavy damage and most of her systems were failing, but her ship could still fly and her weapons could still fire. Nicole announced over the communication channel that she was going to plant the neural virus directly into the Krex command ship's brain center. Her crew had 15 minutes to evacuate to other ships, but Nicole herself would stay behind to pilot the Thunder on its final mission. Jake listened to her calm voice and felt tears in his eyes as he realized what she was about to do. The Thunder accelerated toward the largest Krex vessel with its engines screaming and its hull glowing red from enemy fire. Nicole's ship took hit after hit, but she kept flying straight toward her target while her remaining weapons cleared a path through the enemy formation. The Krex command ship fired everything it had, but the Thunder would not be stopped. When Nicole's ship crashed into the Krex command vessel, the explosion lit up space like a new star, and the neural virus began spreading through the enemy fleet network. Jake watched in amazement as one by one the massive Krex ships began turning on each other, because their corrupted neural networks could no longer tell friend from foe. The virus that Dr. Turner and Zethkri had created was a perfect fusion of human-computer warfare and Zalari bioneural science, and it spread through the Krex hive mind like wildfire. The alien ships that had moved in perfect coordination only minutes before were now attacking anything that moved, including their own vessels. Captain Martinez died when the lightning took a direct hit while protecting a ship full of Zalari refugees, but his sacrifice allowed 3 evacuation vessels to escape safely. Commander Wagner died when his ship exploded while destroying a Krex dreadnought that was targeting civilian survivors, but his attack eliminated the largest enemy vessel in the fleet. The battle lasted 6 hours, and when it was over, the space around the Zalari homeworld was filled with the wreckage of both human and Krex ships. Jake looked at his damage reports and realized that half the human fleet had been destroyed, but every single Krex vessel was either dead or dying in the void. Admiral Sullivan stood in her damaged command center and realized that humanity had just announced its presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible. They had not just survived their first encounter with the Krex, but they had completely destroyed an entire harvester fleet that had been considered invincible. As the last Krex vessel died, Jake felt exhaustion and pride mixed together in his chest, and he knew that everything had changed forever. In the aftermath of the battle, Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the damaged Vengeance and watched as rescue ships moved through the wreckage to save survivors from both human and alien vessels. The space around the Zalari homeworld looked like a graveyard filled with twisted metal and organic matter that had once been mighty warships. The rescued Zalari survivors wept openly when they learned what the humans had sacrificed to save people they had never met before. Zethkri and the other Zalari scientists performed a ritual of eternal gratitude that bound their people to humanity as brothers and sisters in spirit. Jake watched the ceremony and felt something deep in his chest that he could not put into words. Admiral Sullivan received reports from across the battle zone, and the numbers were sobering but also remarkable. The human fleet had lost half its ships and thousands of personnel, but they had completely destroyed over 200 Krex vessels, without allowing a single enemy ship to escape. It was the first time in recorded galactic history that anyone had defeated a Krex harvester fleet. Dr. Turner worked with Zethkri to analyze the wreckage of Krex ships, and what they discovered would reshape everything humans thought they knew about the galaxy. The battle had been detected by monitoring stations across dozens of star systems, and alien civilizations that had been hiding in fear for centuries were suddenly paying attention to the species called humanity. The implications of the victory stretched far beyond saving one group of refugees, because the engagement had proven something that every species in the galaxy had believed was impossible. The Krex were not invincible gods of destruction, but they were just another enemy that could be defeated by the right tactics and enough courage. Within weeks of the battle, alien ambassadors began arriving at the edge of human space, asking for meetings with Admiral Sullivan and the surviving captains. Species after species came forward offering alliance and sharing intelligence about other Krex fleets and their movements across the galaxy. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting for someone like humanity. Jake found himself promoted to Admiral when Admiral Sullivan recommended him for command of the reformed Third Fleet. His new responsibilities included meeting with alien diplomats who wanted to learn human military tactics and representatives from species that had been living in terror of the Krex for thousands of years. The first major alien delegation came from a species called the Korthak, who had been fighting a losing war against the Krex for over a century. Their military commander explained that they had been forced to abandon dozens of colony worlds because they could not match the biological weapons and hive mind coordination of their enemies. Captain Helen Foster, who had survived the battle aboard her damaged cruiser, became the human fleet's liaison with alien military forces. Helen discovered that most galactic species had developed defensive strategies designed to hide from the Krex rather than fight them. The concept of attacking enemy fleets directly was considered suicide by every civilization except humanity. Engineer Maya Rodriguez became the chief architect of a new technology-sharing program that combined the best innovations from dozens of different species. Human engineering provided tactical innovation and fighting spirit, while their new alien allies contributed advanced sciences and manufacturing capabilities that Earth had never imagined. The coalition grew weakly as more species emerged from hiding and asked to join the alliance against the Kreks. Each new member brought unique technologies and knowledge about enemy movements, but they all shared the same desperate hope that humanity had given them. For the first time in centuries, entire civilizations believed the Kreks could be stopped. Dr. Turner established a research center aboard the rebuilt Guardian, where scientists from 40 different species worked together to develop new weapons and defenses. The diversity of knowledge and approaches led to breakthroughs that no single species could have achieved alone. Human creativity combined with alien science produced results that amazed everyone involved. The Zilari provided the foundation for the new alliance by sharing their most advanced shield and energy weapon technologies with every member species. Zethkri explained that his people had always believed knowledge should be shared freely, and they were honored to contribute to the fight against the destroyers of worlds. Jake stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the UES Liberation, and marveled at how much had changed in just 6 months. His ship was 3 times the size of the Vengeance, and it carried technology from 15 different species. The crew included humans working alongside Zilari engineers and Korthak weapons specialists and representatives from dozens of other worlds. The real test of the new alliance came when reports arrived of another Kreks fleet attacking a peaceful species called the Myrans in a system 2 weeks away. Jake led a coalition fleet of over 300 ships representing 20 different species toward their second major battle against the galaxy's greatest threat. The battle above the Myran homeworld lasted only 4 hours because the combined fleet used tactics and technologies that the Kreks had never encountered. Human hit-and-run strategies combined with Zilari neural warfare and Korthak heavy weapons created a devastating combination that overwhelmed the enemy completely. When the last Kreks vessel died, the Myran survivors sent a message of gratitude that was broadcast across the galaxy. Dozens of other species that had been hiding from the Kreks suddenly realized they no longer had to live in fear. The coalition was growing stronger with each victory, and the enemy was finally facing organized resistance. Jake received regular reports of Kreks fleets being defeated across the galaxy as the alliance spread and more species joined the fight. The creatures that had terrorized entire sectors for millennia were discovering that their reign of destruction was ending. Humanity had not just awakened to defend strangers, but had awakened something in every civilization that chose hope over fear. The story concluded with Jake standing in the command center of the Liberation as it led a massive fleet toward reports of the largest Kreks concentration ever detected. Behind him stood representatives of 67 different species, all united by the example humanity had set when they answered a desperate distress call. The final transmission came from the rebuilt Zilari homeworld, where cities were rising again with help from across the galaxy. The message said to our human friends, "You asked for nothing but gave everything, and you have shown the galaxy that even the darkest night must end when someone is brave enough to light the first torch." The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth about humanity, and they were not just another species, but they were the people who refused to let darkness win no matter what the cost. The Kreks would learn, as others had throughout human history, that some species should never be threatened, and those they chose to protect would never stand alone again.